Good afternoon, and welcome to this week's episode of Supply Chain Talk. I'm Alistair Charlton, your host this week. Our main topic today is strengthening supplier relationships and navigating supply chain risks. Before that, we'll discuss a topical news item. And first of all, though, let me introduce my three guests. And the first of these is Dennis Bozzo, who is Head of Order Fulfillment Planning for Europe and North America at Nokia. And he's based in Budapest, in Hungary. Welcome, Dennis. He's a supply chain professional with 15 years of experience working for companies like Nokia and Maersk in logistics services procurement and order planning management. And he holds a BSc degree in transportation engineering and an executive MBA. And he also teaches logistics management at an online business school and creates course for Udemy. He originally wanted to become a high school geography and history teacher, but I'm sure that teaching logistics and supply chain is just as fulfilling. So
Exactly.
welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. My second guest is Michael Clark, who's Vice President and Deputy General Counsel and Global Chief Compliance Officer for Convatec. He's based in New Jersey in the States. Welcome, Michael. And Michael is a collaborative executive leader focused on strategic human capital management and commercial business risk management, advising business leaders on ethical decision making principles and counseling on employment law concerns. And he's created and managed ethics and compliance departments at healthcare and life sciences organizations for over 20 years. And Michael was a paralegal in New York City for a few years after college. And for 6 months before going to law school, he moonlighted as a licensed New York City cab driver on weekends. So I guess you know your way around the city.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Alistair. Appreciate this.
Thanks, Michael. And finally, our third guest is a familiar face, Nanda Kishore, Vice President for Sourcing and Supply Chain at Evoy. And he's based in Bergen in Norway. Welcome again, Nanda. He's an international supply chain and sourcing executive with 28 years of leadership experience driving transformation across global manufacturing, marine, and clean tech sectors. And he's deep expertise in supplier development, localization, and clean tech industrialization. And off the business track, he's an endurance enthusiast. He's climbed mountains including Kilimanjaro, Lobuche, and Mira Peak, which is 6,500 meters high, and he regularly runs half marathons. So welcome all three of you to a fantastic panel.
Thank you.
For my audience, so for the audience out there, please, as usual, do participate in the chat box. If you're on LinkedIn, we try and keep an eye on the comments on LinkedIn, but better if you sign in on the Business Reporter website, so you can be directly in the episode here. And as always, for our most valued contribution or question, there's a Supply Chain Talk mug to be given away at the end. So do keep those comments and insights coming. So let's move now to our news story. And in a week, or on a day, in fact, when yet more things are happening with tariffs, we felt we couldn't really ignore tariffs, which are sort of one of the biggest stories in new supply chain for, well, probably since COVID, and also a pretty massive supply chain risk and disruption, so very relevant to today's topic. But the article we've looked at is one by the website pyments.com, and it's titled "Know Your Business is Key to Stability as Trump's Tariffs Shake Up Supply Chains." And I won't talk about the standard stuff in the article about reporting on the tariffs and Liberation Day, et cetera, et cetera. But it particularly sort of focuses on this issue that tariffs can really incentivize companies to shift suppliers or partners, particularly when seeking to avoid higher costs. And clearly, I imagine there's a lot of people out there thinking, can I rely on my Chinese supplier at 104% tariffs, or do I need to find an alternative? Hard to do when Vietnam's at whatever it is at 75%, but nonetheless, I'm sure people are looking at doing that. But when they do that, businesses must still ensure compliance, not only with customs regulations, but with broader compliance frameworks. And that means, doing your know your business due diligence. And so the article talks about, rushing to onboard new suppliers without thorough KYB checks can really increase the risk of you engaging with disreputable or non-compliant entities. And also mentions that at this time, there can actually be incentives for businesses to resort to fraudulent practices such as transshipment, undervaluation, or misclassification of goods. And so, again, all the more reason why KYB due diligence is really important to do your thorough work and detect these schemes and safeguard corporate compliance and corporate reputation. So I guess given all that, turning to you first, Dennis, I mean, do you think many businesses are already switching to new suppliers? I mean, tariffs have been obviously headlined for a month or two and have been kind of happening or about to happen for a week or two now. And if businesses are switching to new suppliers, how big is the risk, do you think, of inadequate checking and therefore basically appointing a bad supplier?
Yeah, I think many people, including Nokia, I think still we are looking into how it's going to shape out, because there are still a lot of negotiations I think are bound to happen between the governments, if you talk about, let's say, US or Europe or US and then Asian countries. So I believe most of the companies are still in the waiting mode to figure out, okay, what's going to be the final tariff that is going to be in place, and then make some calculations and decision based on that. And then it also depends on the industry you are based in, because, for example, in our industry, we are in a project-driven business. So we can incorporate in, let's say, the new tariffs in the next project that we are running for, we are bidding for. So it's definitely not going to impact us in a way that some, for example, in a consumer space may think. But when it comes to changing suppliers, so if you have a good structure when it comes to compliance, legal practices, I believe, and then screening, I'm sure anyone can figure out whether the supplier they are engaging with is doing shady business or not. So I think you have to get your compliance and legal and then procurement processes and compliance check in place, and if it's done, then you are safe. So
okay. So it sounds like you wouldn't rush into anything yourself, and it would be a foolish business to rush too much. Yeah. Thanks, Dennis. Michael, what are your thoughts on that risk of switching suppliers rather quickly and sort of shortcutting that process of onboarding a supplier?
No, I agree with Dennis. I think it's important that we, I think, continue to be deliberate and to maintain, legacy and historic processes. I mean, I think, there's been a lot of activity, obviously, on the government side, with the U.S. administration and, many of us who supply products to the U.S. market, among others, because obviously I think everyone on the phone has global supply chain and global channel partners. But to the extent we're thinking about the U.S. market, there's obviously been a lot of activity in terms of what should we do, how should we reorganize, how should we restructure. But also, I think those of us that know the head of the administration understand the transactional nature of what it is that he's trying to do. We're in business, so this is a transaction, but I think the pronouncements are transactional in nature, and even some of the news that we've seen over the last few days will say, well, they're waiting for people to come to the table to talk and to negotiate. Now, you can't rely on that, but I think there is a thinking that perhaps these things will shake out in some fashion. I'm in the healthcare and life sciences space, and while we're not exempt from any of this, I think there is, a special nature of the category of our products because they're designed to help patients, save lives, improve lives. So there is a thinking that perhaps there is some sort of special category, even though it hasn't been designated from what I recall in the executive orders. But there may be some additional consideration given, I would think. But regardless of that, we do have to maintain legacy processes. We cannot rush to move our supply chain from country A to country B. And then short circuit the process because the risks are still there. And even though when you think about the corruption perception index and all these other factors that look at the risk of, business partners or suppliers, it doesn't matter that, maybe this country may be perceived as less risky than that country, and that country may be cheaper because, like you said, fly-by-nights will pop up and say, look, we can help you avoid the tariffs. we're located in, name your state in the US, but then, they could fly by night and don't have the controls you want in place that you've put in thinking about for your current suppliers, for years and years. So you cannot short circuit the process because the risks will be there, even in what is perceived to be a lower risk country.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you, Michael. So like Dennis, both of you saying you wouldn't make any short-term moves, wait and see, and even if you make a move to a different supplier, don't shortcut the processes. Nanda, how about you? Obviously, you're kind of in Norway. Are you quite remote from all these impacts?
No, we are not. We are not. And shifting of suppliers in general is always happening. It can be for tariffs this time, it can be for ESG scrutiny or cost pressures, which is most of the time. But quick switches, as mentioned by Dennis and Mikhail, without due diligence, that will lead to risk of non-compliance and especially quality failures. And this I've also experienced in the past when we went to a level of due diligence going into the tier 2 level. And then we found out, we uncovered some kind of issues which we picked up in time to avoid some disruptions. So as the article says, KYB, knowing you know your business, to use that as a compass is a must. So that the businesses, it doesn't matter the objective of switching. If you don't do that, it's always a risk. So there is no question beyond doubt that we have to follow the due diligence process. That's the key.
Okay, that's interesting. And I guess, it's interesting comparing, a few years back when there was COVID going on, I know that some organizations had to really move fast. And in that case, they did deliberately sort of shortcut some processes or relax some authorizations and things like that. But I guess this is a very different situation because this isn't a case of suddenly you're going to run out of materials or if you're slow you're going to miss out. It's a painful situation every week you're paying tariffs, but it's not quite the same. You may not get product at all. So
just a quick comment on what you say, Alistair. Yeah, during the COVID time, yes, as far as I know from my experience, the only thing which was sort of relaxed was the on-site visit and actual evaluation. But the due diligence process was still adopted on a desktop mails, getting all the information and certificates, having some kind of a video call and etc. So, but now things are a little bit being questioned as to do we have to do that? That's my concern because even during COVID times, nobody even raised the hand. Do we have to do due diligence? Because they thought, okay, we can't send, but can we do a video?
Yes.
That's different from when we hear people ask, do we have to do this? Because we need to make the change quickly. And that's a red flag for the whole industry.
Okay, thank you. Well, an interesting article. I think we consistently we all don't agree with the message of saying, oh, people are going to cut all the corners and just appoint anyone they want to. So that's great. Let's move now to our main topic. And as a reminder, it is strengthening supplier relationships and navigating supply chain risks. And the first agenda point that we're going to discuss is building trust and resilience, strategies for risk-free supplier partnerships. So I guess as the news story highlighted there, supply chain shocks can really test supplier relationships, and tariffs can significantly increase the cost of one supplier compared with another. But I guess you may understand a lot less about a new supplier and also the supply tiers below them. So Dennis, turn to you. What are some of the ways that you recommend to build trust and resilience with existing or new suppliers?
I think you have to realize that whenever you work with a supplier, you might not be that supplier's only customer, right? So certainly there are other customers they are serving. And if you don't have, let's say, a smooth cooperation, a smooth way of working together, then definitely you can be the back end of that customer list at the supplier because they are not really in favor of, for example, working with you. Because it's, for example, you don't pay your invoices on time, or you always picky about the prices and come back to renegotiate every 3 or 6 months, right? Because you want to always benefit from whatever you think there is out there that you can capture. So I think number one, where you can really build a strategic and free risk supplier relationship is to realize that you are not the only customer, right? So you have to you have to have a decent share of wallet with that supplier spend to be considered really as a strategic partner. Because if you are not reaching the threshold, they're not gonna consider you, no matter how important you are yourself. That's number one. And I think, yeah, number two, what we also aiming to do is work with really globally recognized partners, with whom we can easily move production, for example, if it comes to that. And then, yeah, I think that's about it. So reach a share of wallet where you can be considered, as a strategic partner, and then certainly they will also match that importance, and then work together. Yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting implication, because I guess I don't know if anyone in the audience is from a smaller business, but does that sort of say that if you can, as a smaller business, you maybe want to choose a smaller suppliers, rather than the big huge brand suppliers? If you can find a smaller one, then you can become a little bit more important with them.
Yeah, because just imagine, let's say you are working with a transportation provider, let's say Maersk, but you only have, I don't know, like 10 containers per year. Yes. I mean, for Maersk, is not even a rounding error, right?
Yeah.
And then you are surprised that if they don't take your business seriously. So I would then go to, let's say, a small, much smaller, let's say, local freight forwarder, and have them manage your 10 containers.
Yes. Yeah. No. Okay. That's good.
Yeah, I've seen that situation as well, Alistair. I mean, I've worked for different sized companies in the life sciences market, and we've had situations where more so on the channel side, on the distribution side, as opposed to the supply side, where we've had distributors that are 3 or 4 times the size of our company, whether it's a drug manufacturer or a device manufacturer, particularly in certain markets, let's say in Latin America or Asia, where, let's say, hypothetically, we are a $1 billion company, but the distributor itself, because it's in many, many different countries, and is 1 or 2 or 3 options are available, so they're 3 or 4 times the size. So they can say, look, you can sell through us, or you could go with someone else, but there are not that many options. So it is interesting to see to what extent your partner, whether it's on the channel side or on the supply side, is larger. And if you have those options of, choosing different size, so there's more ability to negotiate and there's more leverage. If you can create that situation, it may be better, obviously, depending on the integrity of the third party. But also, in addition to what Dennis said, I think communication is a key factor with respect to these relationships. You can't always get it the way you want to, but if you try to build a strong communication framework and saying, look, we need to do due diligence. Everybody understands why. It's just a good business practice, but there may also be legal and regulatory requirements as to knowing your partner, knowing your business. And, if you explain, the what as well as the why, this is what we're going to do with respect to a questionnaire or a survey. This is what we need to have with respect to some sort of educational process. We're not impugning the nature of what you do, but we have to establish, that we have gone through the diligence process, that we've verified the integrity of our partners in a way that you would expect us to do if the shoe were on the other foot. So if you communicate that, I think, the why as to what we're doing based on our regulatory requirements or our industry requirements, I think that helps. It's not a guarantee, but it will help, I think, strengthen the process by, having clear communication, and the fact that if we do these processes, these diligence processes, these assurance processes, it can help strengthen our relationship for the medium and the long term. I think that is, a way to communicate, or a way to establish the rationale for what it is that we're trying to do here.
Yeah. No, I like the way that both you and Dennis are talking about, in a way, the behavior of the customer to the supplier, of explaining things, dealing with them well, paying them on time, that kind of thing. So it's all around, if you explain, if you do things well, then you're building that trust. Nanda, what are your thoughts on how best to build trust?
So speaking of trust and resilience, I would say trust is the currency of resilience. That's my thinking. So trust is not built in crisis or during crisis. It's built much before it. So the most resilient suppliers have managed are those with whom we co-invested on long-term capabilities, shared development risks, and engaged in open book costing. So these things do not happen just because we are in a crisis. We need to build that as a process. So I'm a fan of joint business reviews. I'm a fan of using compliance clauses and soft metrics, and also encourage to do the mapping of beyond tier 1, go to tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. So these are some of the things, the way we can build trust and resilience. And a quick comment on your introduction to this topic is there is no risk-free is a myth. So I would always say risk ready should be the goal. So we should always be ready for the risk. We can't say that we are free of risk, because if we don't know what's around the corner and we know that we don't know, that's a good thing. But if we don't know what we don't know, then so we can't say that we are free of risk. So
no, you're very right to pick up on that wording, which I have to say I didn't write myself. But risk-free is but I think it makes a very good point, actually, which is to, in your own company, it's to manage expectations. Look, you can't be free of all risks. You absolutely do the right things to try and identify risks and monitor them, but you can't pretend that it's risk-free. Who could have seen 104% tariff being imposed on China? I mean, kind of, but you could have foreseen there might be tariffs, there might be trade barriers. So it's a very good point you made there.
We need to have this kind of radar, like monitor what's happening around. So we have seen for last 4 years, not just after the January 6th election. We know right from the time Trump lost his election, he has been advocating and talking about all this stuff. So if we are shrewd, we could have already forecasted this kind of situation. And we can't just sit back till announcements are made and it's all implemented.
Yeah, that's an interesting example. Let's turn to our second point, which is prioritizing and mitigating risks in a complex supply chain landscape. So I guess, that question of prioritizing is always a difficult question of how much time, how many resources to spend on risk management, and should you prepare for what seem to be extremely unlikely events, but which could really bring your business to a halt, or is it better to put more of your time and effort and prioritize risks which, hopefully rare, but they may well occur every few years? So, Dennis, how would you set priorities in terms of looking at risks and mitigating risks?
I think since COVID, and even since the first Trump administration, many global companies have realized that risk management is a must-have. So that's why they already incorporated in their business models. They develop BCB, business continuity plan and whatnot. So it's not a question whether it's nice to do. It's a must to do, in my opinion. And COVID, gave us a really good, let's say, wake-up call. Who hasn't been developing, risk or continuity plans before, then they must do it. And for example, because of that, we were able to move a production when the Ukrainian war broke out of Ukraine quite quickly, because due to COVID, we were prepared how to move, for example, production faster to another country because of the situation over there. So that's definitely helped, and we still do, I think, once a quarter. At least I had, for example, a business continuity plan exercise last week, where our office, where I'm based in Hungary, was, contaminated water, all of the capital area. So then everybody is sick, out for 6 weeks. How would, the business could continue? So, and then on the other hand, when we talk about, for example, risk, many of our suppliers has experienced, for example, cybersecurity attacks. When the operation was completely halted and shut down for weeks. If you talk about, for example, Expeditors, or if you talk about Demco, and for that you need to have other suppliers working for you, not just one single source, but then you have to have multiple suppliers delivering the same type of services. If you talk about, for example, transportation management, or if you talk about manufacturing. For example, we work with Foxconn or Sanmina. but they have facilities around the globe, so we can transfer the production from one country to another rather seamlessly, because we still work with the same supplier, just in a different country. So
yeah.
So that's why it's important to keep more players in your portfolio when it comes to suppliers, so not just one. Because
Yeah.
that's can be a huge risk.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. No, there's some really interesting examples there, and it's and to be honest, the little insight there, I'm sure lots of people have thought, well, what would happen if we had, a building out of action, a factory or a warehouse or an office? But actually, the fact that you're thinking, actually, what if all the people were out of action because they were really sick for weeks and weeks? That's a
like
very
COVID, for example. It's a similar example. It's water contamination or a virus, so it's kind of similar. So
yeah. Okay. No, thanks for those examples. Michael, sort of, how do you sort of prioritize which risks are the most important ones to look at? Do you go for the big unlikely ones or the regular ones which could still be disruptive?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes, I think, to all. I think you can never depart from, historically what you've looked at, right? Whether it's looking at certain markets or countries that are historically or have legacy high risk perception. If there are, but some of those things change, right? Some of those markets change, some of those countries change, some of the regions change. I think it's always good to do benchmarking with industry peers, making sure obviously that you're not running afoul of anti-competition, antitrust laws, but have those discussions about what sort of changes are you seeing with certain types of suppliers or certain types of other third parties? What sort of changes are you seeing in certain markets or regions based upon maybe supply chain disruptions from, like others mentioned COVID, from the recent changes, and from any other geopolitical concerns? Because nothing is static. You may have certain countries that have certain reputations, but things do shift. And then obviously cyber is an issue, because we have all these cyber gangs and cyber terrorists that may set up shop in countries that have a low threshold for entry or low regulatory or enforcement framework. So you need to be concerned about that, even though you may not know where these cyber gangs may be. So but you also have to think about that. So you do the benchmarking, you obviously do the comprehensive diligence, knowing that you should be flexible in terms of thinking about what the risk areas may be. And then I think there are opportunities to use there are always opportunities to use technology that can help you think about things, or help the company or your function think about things and expand what humans are able to do and how they're able to analyze. So whether it's data analytics from just historical business, or whether it's using generative AI to either look at the data more quickly than a human can, or maybe to analyze it more robustly than a human can, that helps you, I think, identify either risky activities, risky companies, risky industry sectors, or risky markets or regions in a way that maybe we may have a certain bias in favor or against, but hopefully if the AI has been trained well, it may say, well, you need to look at these other factors that you haven't considered. So, technology, benchmarking, and then being flexible in terms of, regions and markets and countries, I think is a way to go to help you reprioritize the risks in your supply chain and potentially in your commercial chain. I think those are approaches that we can take now.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Lots of great insights there. Nanda, what are your thoughts on how best to prioritize and mitigate risks?
Yeah, so, in my experience, I used to do a lot of supplier audits and due diligences. And one of the questions we used to ask is about risk management. How do risk prioritize? And most often, like the comment from Sheldon, the answer was, oh, we follow our business strategy. So, yeah, but people don't understand that risk is no longer linear. It's not like one-to-one. It's concurrent and interconnected. So that means risk prioritization to me is a resource allocation decision. It's not just about somebody sitting with an Excel sheet and say, is it a risk? No, okay, take it out. So it's not how people have to do that. And also not all risks are equal. But in my experience, I've seen what we call as a low probability and high impact.
Yes.
ignoring that is actually fatal to any business. I've seen 9.9 out of 10 businesses, they just say, what's the probability? Oh, it's very, very meager. Okay, then let's not waste our resources or time on that. But that's the one, because it has a high impact, that destroys the businesses. So it's all about clarity of consequence. I know I usually follow the tier method: tolerable, intolerable, emergent, and redundant. So that's what we're talking about, is balancing the likelihood versus the consequence. So we categorize strategically or operationally or compliance-wise or financially. So this is what I meant. It's like multi-dimension. So prioritization, we have to bear the consequence and the impact. That's what should determine what's the priority, and it should always come with an allocation of cost or resources and time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and that is the sort of the classic thing, isn't it? It is trying to assess the likelihood and the impact, and I guess as COVID is, I mean, we always keep talking about it, but for good reason. It's the big example where, you know, a so-called black swan event, you know, it came along and it was the biggest thing ever in terms of supply chain disruption and business disruption. And I guess it's a question of how much, you know, do you say, well, we've got to build a warehouse and a factory in every single country in case one country goes down? Well, that would be just disproportionately expensive. But do you look at, you know, what's the most cost-effective way you can get some protection against the risk, I guess. Good. Let's move to our final discussion point, which is thinking about technology and so on, using AI to streamline operational processes and address workflow vulnerabilities. So, of course, you've all read lots about AI and its potential, and we've discussed it many times on Supply Chain Talk. Dennis, how do you think AI can assist on processes, and can it actually address workflow vulnerabilities? So interested in your thoughts on AI's role in helping make things stronger and more robust.
Yeah, we had a case recently in Dallas, USA, where a tornado struck our warehouse. It was even on the news, I don't know, CNBC or whatnot. And just rewinding, you know, how quickly, for example, the news reached out to me that our business is impacted. Because certainly there was no automation or AI support, you know, for such, let's say, alert to reach me that okay, something is going on. So it took like 3 or 4 hours for the news to reach me, because I'm also responsible for the warehouse. So definitely, if you talk about technology, and then AI is reading the news and then, you know, capturing, hopefully from a trustworthy, you know, a news outlet that something is happening, then certainly that news could travel much faster than it did in our case recently. So definitely there is merit in applying the technology for such purposes as well. And then certainly streamlining operation and processes. I mean, AI can do many things much faster, more complex things than human can do, right? Especially if you talk about time zone difference, like in a large organization, global organization, where I work at, where I need to collaborate with people, you know, in other geographies, other time zones. And then if I could have, you know, some part of the process run by an AI or any other technological solution, then it could, you know, make or break. If you talk about, for example, customer penalty, if you can sort out things much faster, thanks to AI, then I don't need to, I don't know, pay like $1 million US penalty, for example. So definitely there will be very solid use cases for such applications.
Okay. No, that's interesting examples, and and it's interesting that for just a warehouse being hit by a tornado. I mean, I know tornadoes do damage each year, but you know, you work out the number of warehouses and commercial buildings destroyed by tornadoes and the number of them in the US, and it must be, you're unlucky to have got hit by a tornado, that's for sure. But interesting how it sounded like you had plans in place and news feeds in place, so you could be informed and act pretty quickly, which is often is the key thing. Yeah. Michael, what are your thoughts on whether AI can really help here?
Yeah, I think it can. And one, it's I think good from a business perspective because obviously people are adopting it significantly. But even beyond just the fact that it's a good business tool to have and that people are rushing to or are rushing to evaluate its use, there also are legal and regulatory requirements that are in place now. And for example, even though I'm working for a global company, I have a global role. There are guidances that are coming out at least had come out from the prior DOJ, the Department of Justice, and the prior administration, which my understanding are still in effect, that relate to evaluation of corporate compliance programs. And they require that, or they stated these guidelines or guidances that companies are expected to use data analytics tools to assess and monitor data related to transactions, third-party relationships, and evaluate this data in real time, to help prevent and detect misconduct. So there's this requirement from, a key enforcement agency in the US, which should have global impact, that we are expected to use these data tools. So whether it's just, I'll call it bread and butter data analytics, whether it's artificial intelligence or generative AI, you're expected to use these tools to assess data. And it could be looking at, monitoring activities that may be part of your contract with your suppliers or other third parties. It could be looking at, just automating due diligence, scanning compliance databases, identifying red flags in terms of transactions that may or may not involve your company, but may involve other companies that perhaps these computer programs can assess and prepare reports that you can then use to determine either will you have a relationship, what's the nature of that relationship, and then what sort of contractual controls do you want to have in place based upon what the results are from the AI. So it can be, I think it's a necessary tool. It can be extremely valuable, and it can really grab data beyond, I think, the capabilities of humans, and then can assess it and provide you with summary reports that can help your decision-making process for your business. So I think it's a critical thing to use because it can do things that we simply can't do and make us do our jobs much more robustly and much more effectively.
Yeah, that's a really interesting example, Michael, that I don't know if that's happening in other jurisdictions where basically government and regulations are saying you've got to have a certain standard of monitoring things. So to say, oh, well, we didn't know this supplier was a dodgy one, you kind of, it's not gonna give you any mitigation if you're brought in front of the courts to say you've broken various laws and here come the fines, and you won't get any.
I suspect that will happen because I think to the extent that there is enforcement agencies, I think, talk to each other. The question is whether that's going to continue under the current administration, but they talk to each other, and to the extent they say, look, this is what we expect from one key enforcement agency, as goes the DOJ, may go the SFO, may go other European enforcement agencies. So I expect those sort of communications to happen and those sort of expectations to start working their way across the globe. I would expect that.
That's a really interesting example. Ananda, what are your thoughts on how AI can help your processes, reduce vulnerabilities?
Well, there are lots of possibilities, and it's continually evolving. And some of the things which I'm involved and I'm aware of, or I can mention about lead time anomaly detections and supplier risk dashboards, bots for workflow automations. So the possibilities are endless, and it's keep evolving. But I wish to make at least two comments on this specific AI things. One is, AI's value lies in augmenting decision making, not replacing it. Coming from a sourcing background, I can say the human judgment on relationship context is still a key. You can't replace that from an AI. And the second thing is, of course, it's true that AI enables proactive risk sensing, etc., etc. But AI is only strong as the data that feeds it. So if we do not ensure data governance and cross-functional access, because most of the organizations are getting mostly into a silo kind of a data ownership where you don't have a cross-functional access. So you're feeding to the same AI tool in a very silo way. So it doesn't make sense for it to come up with a different kind of outcomes. So these two are key for kind of utilizing AI in a better way for businesses. Of course, AI can do lots of things, but the question is, how can businesses utilize that? They can't utilize if they think that AI can replace something, or if they think that the data, you can just pass on whatever data and we can still get a better outcome. That would be not efficient.
Yes. Well, I guess AI itself should be added to the risk register, because
It
if you
should be.
rely on it too much,
I've already added it.
it can have its own risks. And we haven't yet had a sort of a kind of, I don't think we've yet have a sort of a data breach or a hack into AI. But goodness me, if AI started going rogue and being given distorted messages, it clearly could
But
have.
it's there, but we are not yet able to determine if this is due to a error in AI, or is it due to a kind of a hack. So we kind of think probably it's just wrong, so we try to do it in a different way.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we don't know what we don't know on AI.
No, that's very true. And in fact, well, we get to our next episode is related to AI as well. Well, look, as always, the episode flies by. We've
Yes.
reached the end of our time. Thank you. Sheldon had a few comments. I saw, Nanda, that you replied, so I hope the audience found Sheldon's comments useful. And so, Sheldon, a supply chain talk mug is on its way to you. I think you've got one already, so it'll add to your tea set. So thank you for those comments. Our next episode is next week on the 16th of April. It is 1 hour later than normal. So it's 5 p.m. UK time, 1 hour later than normal on the 16th of April. And the subject is optimizing your supply chain with AI-powered spend analytics. So very much focusing on procurement and spending and how AI can help there. So it'll be an interesting example of looking at where AI can support supply chains. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much to the three of you. Some absolutely fantastic insights and examples from all of you there. So Dennis Bosko, Head of Order Fulfillment Planning for Europe and North America at Nokia. Michael Clark, Vice President and Deputy General Counsel and Global Chief Compliance Officer at Convatec. And Nanda Kishore, Vice President for Sourcing and Supply Chain at Evoy. Thank you very much, the three of you. Really great discussion. Thank you to our audience for taking part. And I hope you'll be joining us at 5 p.m. this time next week. Goodbye.